Hello, people of the internet. Welcome to my channel. I am your host, Lucas. And today, I'm going to go over and explain some code that in a project that I have been working on. I'm going to go over some of the files, what we have done, some of the code that we have done, why I coded it in the first place, what's it there for, and show the result that we have so far. If you find this entertaining or enjoyable or interesting in any way, leave a like and comment down below. And if you don't, or if you didn't find it enjoyable, or you saw a glaring error in my code, also leave a comment down below and express what the error was, and express how could I possibly fix it. So yeah, let us begin. First off, we are in the Game Manager CPP. Pretty much, this is the file that manages the game and makes sure that it runs properly. Make sure that things are supposed to be running as intended. We include a few files. We include the scene. We include the header. The header is here. We pretty much have a few things here, but the main things you should look at is we have the player, a player class, which just creates the player. We have a vector projectile shots, which pretty much we want to make multiple shots that our player can shoot. And then we have an enemy spawner, which is pretty much spawn enemies. And here, when we call the game manager, we set the window. We have a window file, which is pretty much display a window for our game to appear in. We have a timer, pretty much make the game run at a stable frame rate. We check if the game is running, which when we press the run button, it should be. We check for the current scene, which when we start running, we want it to be empty. And we have a player and enemy spawner, which pretty much is like when we run the game, we don't want to already have a player before it spawns. On create, we set the height and width in pixels here. We set it here. We check if we can create a window and we can set the timer, and if we can't, don't run it, don't create it, and destroy it, because we don't want to try to run code that we can't run. We set the current scene to scene 1. We only have one scene currently. We have a bunch of default values for our game objects: mass, radius, orientation, rotation, position, velocity, stuff like that. And we give those default values to our player to every one of our shots. We've set it here. And we call the enemy spawner, which is just have the enemy spawner. We also have code here to pretty much, if we can't make a player or if we can't make a shot, don't run the code, destroy it. Don't bother running code that you can't create. When we are running, we start the timer. While running, we update the timer every frame. We update the scene every frame. We update the enemy and the enemy spawner every frame, and we render everything every frame, and we are running at 60 frames per second. Event handler is pretty much certain actions that are universal across every scene. Currently, the only thing here is different forms of quitting, and if we had multiple scenes, changing them if we wanted to. On destroy, pretty much when we wanted to close the game, we close the window, we stop the timer, we delete the current scene, delete the player, delete the shots, delete everything in our game, so that if we want to run again, the game doesn't break. We just set the height and width for our scene, set things in it, render the scene, render everything in it, render the player at a certain scale, render every shot at a set scale, and render the enemy at set scale. And here is clean up, pretty much, clean up every enemy every time we call this, we pretty much just clean up every shot so that we're not constantly creating shots or we're constantly running code that we no longer want to run. And we have load scene here. Just load the scene and then make sure the scene that we're running in is the correct one. Here's the player body. Here in the onCreate. When it's created, set the image to the spaceship and then render the texture right here. And if it can't render, don't bother creating it. In the renderer, it's pretty much rendering the image, setting the center of the sprite to be the center of the image, setting the dimension, the size of the sprite to be the collision, and setting its coordinates in relation to the screen. And then we render it here. In the event handler, it's pretty much stuff how we can control our ship and move it around. This part is to check if we are pressing the button. Here is to check if we're no longer pressing the button. If we press A and D, we are updating the angle that the player is facing. Press W, we activate the boost, and if we press space, we shoot. In the ship movement, we update the direction based off of player angle. Say here, player direction. We set the player direction to always be 160 degrees. That way we're not doing some overlapping or code breaks. This is to make sure that the ship is facing the direction that the image is. And this is to, if we are boosting forward, that it boosts in the direction that it's facing relative to its velocity and on the XY. We have dampening force, which pretty much slow down after pressing the button, after you're no longer boosting, and then updates position based off the velocity. Here is to make sure that the that the ship doesn't leave the game boundaries, and this is to shoot a projectile when we press the spacebar. Here, every time we press the spacebar, we create a new projectile object, checks if we can create it, sets the shot speed and the same angle, make sure it's facing the direction that it's going in, sets velocity to match where it's going in. That way, when we're rotating, it goes in the direction that we want it to. Set the position to be the same as the ship. Set the velocity to be updated here. Set active, pretty much activate the projectile. Create it, and then push it to the stack. The stack is pretty much making additional objects in the scene. Here, this is pretty much set so that a main mechanic is that every time you shoot the projectile, it has recoil and you go in the opposite direction. That's why this line is here. That's why this is negative here. Update. We update the ship every frame, and then when it gets destroyed, you free up the image and texture so that you don't come into collision errors. With the projectile, create the image same as the player. Set the image to the projectile image, and if you can create it, good. If you can't, don't. Render checks if it's active. If it's active, if the projectile is active, render it. It's the same as our player. And if it's not active, don't bother. This is to pretty much update its position every frame, and if it leaves the game boundaries, destroy it. And same code as here, destroy everything. Now we have the enemy spawner. The enemy spawner is pretty much spawn an enemy at the desired location. And create enemy every time, same thing. If you can create enemy, display its position, and if you can't, say it failed. Update enemy. This is the code that is currently not functioning. This code right here is designed to pretty much if the enemy and the projectile collide with one another, delete both. If I press it's hit by projectile, this code right here in the enemy class is to pretty much check if the projectile collision box or collision dimensions, and the enemy collision dimensions overlap in some way. Currently, I do not know why it's not working. I'm still trying to figure that out. And if you have a solution to my problem while watching this, comment down below, tell me, enlighten me, I'd appreciate it. But how it's intended, how I want it to be intended is anytime a projectile intersects with a enemy, you delete that projectile and enemy, and if it doesn't, you don't. And if they don't intersect, you don't destroy either. Here we render the enemy, and here if it gets destroyed, you clean them up. Here, here's the enemy. Same thing, you render with a set image. This is just the one we have currently. Normal render code here. Move towards, this is pretty much code to make sure the enemy just goes towards the player and tries to follow them. Check code that I showed before. Updates the enemy every frame, updates position, get the position, and then updates, and then the destroy if it gets destroyed. Now to the scene. In the scene, it sets the scene height and width to 25 and 15 to be more manageable units and not the massive units. We create a player, set it to be at the center of the screen. We have 3 enemy spawners that will spawn an enemy every time. This is to just get the projectile to check if it overlaps. We have code here that once if we close the game, just delete the player, delete everything, delete the spawner, clean up everything. Here, this is to update the player, the projectile, and the enemies every frame. Render the background if we had one, and render the player, the projectile, and the enemies at a certain scale. If I set it at the normal scale of 1, the sprites would be really big. And then event handler to pretty much get all the inputs from the player. So let us see how the game runs. As you see, you have the player. I can rotate. Enemies are coming towards me. And if I shoot, I go backwards. Oh my god. I'll move the mouse. Oh god, they're getting too close. They should be dying, but the code doesn't work. And yeah, that's the code that we have so far. Yeah. That's the code that we have so far. So yeah, that's our project. That's our code. We went over everything. We went over how the code worked. Hopefully this was informative or interesting. If you found this interesting, I'm glad you found it interesting. Leave a like, leave a comment, express how you found it interesting, express how you found going over each piece of code interesting. If you found it interesting, or whatever. And if you didn't find it interesting, or if you found something glaringly wrong with the code, also leave a comment. Express to me what I may have done wrong. What error do I have? How can I improve? How can I make this function properly? Who knows? Yeah, if you have, leave a comment down below your thoughts. I hope you, and yeah, that was my project. And yeah, hope to see you again in the far or near future. And as always, I hope you enjoy.